Hi there, everyone. This is John Carrots here on OSH Radio. And tonight I'm doing a little bit different interview. I give time to the Transhumanist Party to talk. So tonight I'm giving time to the Alliance Party. And we have two members of the Alliance Party on with us. I'll let them introduce themselves, talk about what they do, and the Alliance Party. Go ahead, guys.
Thanks, John.
Go ahead, Jim.
No, go ahead. Phil, why don't you kick it off?
I'll just kick it off. I'll let you know who I'm Phil Fuehrer. I'm National Vice Chair of the Alliance Party. I'm also the State Chair of the Independence Alliance. That's the Minnesota affiliate for the Alliance Party. Been working in the alternative third-party political sphere for over 30 years, trying to give Minnesotans and Americans a competitive third option in politics. And I'll turn it on over to Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Thanks, John. My name is Jim Rex. I am the National Chair Emeritus of the Alliance Party. I'm also the Chair Emeritus of the South Carolina affiliate. Once you get to a certain age, they start hanging emeritus on a lot of your titles. So that's what that probably really means. I have been involved with the Alliance Party formally since 2018, when it was formed by merging a number of independent third parties together to create a national organization. Before that, I was the co-founder and chair of the American Party, which we created in South Carolina. And this happened after I got out of office. I had been elected as the Secretary of Education. It's called the State Superintendent of Education in South Carolina, but it's an elected constitutional office, 4-year term. And I ran for that, first time I ever ran for anything, and had the fortune or misfortune, depending upon how you look at it, of being elected. In South Carolina, which is a very red state, I was elected as a Democrat and won by 455 votes out of more than 1.1 million cast. So it was the closest election in the history of our state for a statewide office. And so after spending 4 years in office, I saw, even back then, my term was 2007 to 2011. Even back then, I could see how broken our two-party system was, even being a part of it, especially. So after I got out of office, I worked with a Republican friend of mine who had run for governor, and the two of us decided there had to be a better way. We created the American Party, which ran a bunch of candidates for about 4 years. And then, as I said, we merged with other parties, including the party in Minnesota that Phil helped found. And since then, we've been the Alliance Party. The only thing I would add, I guess, before I shut up, is that the Alliance Party is more than an attempt just to give additional choices in terms of another third party. A lot of our people agree that we have plenty of parties. That's not the problem. The problem is we need a different approach to politics, and we need to attract a different type of person to run for public office. And that's the main theme, the central theme of what Phil and I and others are trying to do.
No, that is a good point. Yeah, too. You just not the numbers, but you don't just need quantity, you need quality. That's the issue. So
yeah, you need quality, and you need people with a different motivation. One of the things that the Alliance Party is adamant about is term limits. We're the only party in the history of the country that has required term limits of its candidates who are running for legislative offices, whether it's state or federal. And we also are adamant about transparency, and we're the only party, again, in the history of the country that has required candidates to put their IRS basic information from the previous 3 years on their campaign websites. So through an agreement, a contract really with our candidates, we stress what is appropriate and acceptable behavior and what isn't. And we think that is a lot of the problem. The people that say they're turned off by politics in America are really, for the most part, saying they're turned off by politicians in America. We've got to give them a different type of elected official.
Yeah, that is a good point. I agree with that. And I think some of the stuff we see going on today, I think it's getting out of hand in some ways, but that's just what I think. It would be nice. I remember a different day. I think that's sort of what happens when you're older, though, you know. So I kind of miss some of the older days. I don't know if it was any better, but wasn't always in your face like it is today. You know what I mean? So, what would the Alliance Party, how would the Alliance Party like to go about making these changes? What do you see that hopefully you could do in the future and the party could do in the future?
Bill, why don't you jump in? I talked too much already.
Jim, you're among the best presenters and speakers we have in the Alliance Party. So I always appreciate being on with you and letting you do most of the talking. You both touched on it there a little bit, Jim and John. You said quality. I like to say that when it comes to the Alliance Party, or the Independence Alliance, that it's equal parts substance and style. Substance are the policy positions, the platform planks, but style is what Jim talked about, and that's the tax returns and transparency, term limits, and making a pledge for that as well. And it's the idea that we don't have a position for everything under the sun. We're trying our best to create people over parties, country over parties, and so the platform is prescriptive in nature, but it's not, but it's not fully required. I know in Minnesota, for example, we just asked for 80% agreement on our platform. And again, we're not covering everything under the sun. We leave a lot of open rooms for candidates to represent their constituency. One of our former chairs used to say, a Democrat in Texas is considerably different than a Democrat in Washington State. And you got to have some flexibility. You can't have a national platform that is so rigid that it locks people in that way. And so even in Minnesota here, we try to have that flexibility of allowing candidates to represent their constituency, have enough meat on the bone so that folks get an idea of who you are and what you stand for, but enough flexibility that candidates can then pick up the ball and run it the rest of the way.
That is a good point, though, about the United States, because the United States is so large and, the states have different issues and stuff. That is a good point that, Republicans and Democrats have different issues in different states because it's almost, I was doing a comparison on England, and 11 of our states are as big or bigger than the British Isles. So, I mean, that just tells you how large this country is. And there is a difference from one coast to the other coast. I mean, I'm from Pennsylvania. I remember when I was a kid, there was a difference from the East Coast of Pennsylvania to the West Coast of Pennsylvania. Even the verbiage was different. I'm from Allentown, people from Pittsburgh, we called things different words and everything. So it is amazing how things can be different in this country. And I think that's one thing that people from the outside don't realize. When you're talking to some of the European countries, I know they say things about the fact that the United States doesn't understand trade well because we haven't had to do trade the same as they have as a small country. But then again, they can say that about us, but they don't understand how each of our states can have so different interests and how the main government has to try to kind of make everybody happy. And that's not easy. That does make it hard. So we are unique because of our size and because of the fact we have a dispersed population. Also, like I've been to Russia, and there's, just like Canada, there's parts in Russia where there's nobody. And they're big countries, but that doesn't add to the people voting for different issues because, it's just a whole different ball of wax compared to how this country is. So that does make a big difference, and that's a good point.
Well,
Now,
when it comes to policy, as he just said, it differs because of the size of the country and the diversity of it, like you just said, John. But the other thing I think that people have to remember about policy is that it also differs rapidly, increasingly rapidly, it seems, over time. I think the American voter is sometimes played by politicians on the so-called policy positions. And anybody who's paying attention recognizes that the policy statements that are made by parties mean almost nothing. I mean, look where the Republicans are on issues where they used to be 180 degrees on the other side of an issue just one or two election cycles ago, and vice versa with the Democrats. So the parties themselves are constantly in fluctuation as to where they stand on quote unquote policies. And then when you get to the individual candidates, my God, some of them change their minds, flip-flop, whatever we want to call it, on a daily or hourly basis. So I think that informed voters are going to have to get much more perceptive about who they're going to support. And it has to go beyond just their policy statements, whether it's on their website or what they hear them say in their campaign rhetoric, because those policies don't really mean much. And I think that's why politicians have such a lousy reputation among most voters in terms of their honesty, integrity, their hypocrisy, because they don't adhere to this policy statements they make, and they certainly don't live up to them in terms of their own behavior. So policy is not unimportant, but the character of the person, how that person behaves, how they solve problems, how honest they are, how they run their campaigns in terms of their opponents, all of those things in the long run probably mean more to me as a voter, because the policies of today, the policies of the 2024 election, I know are going to be different in 2025, 2026, 2027. So the candidate I elect has to be somebody who I trust has the character and the intellect to deal with those problems in a way that benefit me as an individual American citizen.
That is a good point, and I like what you said about the parties, because going back, I mean, before we have the let's call them the Trump years of Trump running for president and stuff, but before that, I was even, I felt that the Democrats weren't the Democrats that I thought of when I was younger, and the Republicans weren't really the Republicans I thought of when I was younger either. And I had felt that they had swapped a lot on a lot of things and changed around, so it was kind of interesting to me when you said that, because it's like, I remember thinking, I don't know, if I just didn't feel that it was the same as it was when I was a younger man. Of course, I guess me and Jim were probably the two oldest on here. And I think we've seen that it does change, and it's interesting how it changes. And I like what you said about the character of the man, and I think I see that's a good point, because if you can trust the character of the man in office, you can feel a lot more secure yourself than at night,
I think that's the way most Americans feel, John, especially if they pay attention and kind of study what's happening in politics. These issues, these come and go, they ebb and flow. As you say, the parties change their posturing on it, candidates change their posturing on it, and that's not all bad. I mean, some of that change is necessary. It comes from learning and adapting. So instead of putting, we have what we call single issue voters. And these are people, as you know, who only care deeply about one issue. It can be guns, it can be abortion, it can be whatever. And the hell with anything else, because that's the one issue they're going to vote on. And that is not the way to pick elected officials who are going to have to deal with a myriad of issues that affect your state or your county or your country. And not only a myriad, but a changing myriad. That's, we live, as you said, we're probably the two oldest. I'm probably the oldest here. I'm sure I am. But that things are going to change. The problems are going to change. The situations are going to change. The conditions are going to change. And we need people in office who can adapt to those changes and still seek solutions that benefit the majority of the people in this country. And you don't get that with single sound bites or people that take positions in their negative campaigns, which we see more and more of. So I don't know. It's an educational process, I think, for all of us in this country. If we're going to make this democracy work better, we're going to have to get better at figuring out who the candidates are that really can do the best job for the majority of us for the majority of time. And we're not particularly well educated about making those choices.
All good points. Before we get to talking about this election, I just want to say that, people listening, if they are interested in trying to be a part of the Alliance Party, they can go to your website. And what's exactly the website, Guy? I will put it down below then if you guys could talk about the websites where people can read more about the party.
Sure. The national website is www.theallianceparty.com. So just pretty straightforward on that, theallianceparty.com. For the national site, since I'm in Minnesota, I'll give us a plug. We're www.mnip.org. As far as for Minnesota Independence Alliance Party.org, mnip.org.
That's good. So people hopefully that will see this, that are interested in becoming a part and helping out with the Alliance Party, can hopefully look it up and contact you gentlemen. Now, I did want to talk about how you see this election going, and maybe you guys have any ideas, and sorry to put you on the spot a little bit, but I like to ask this close to the election. How do you think it's going, and how do you think it might turn out after the election? What are your feelings and possibly hopes or wishes?
Bill, go ahead.
Thanks, Jim. This is, I think, among the tightest of the elections that we've had. I do think that Donald Trump we're talking national, we're talking presidential race, I'm taking it. I think Donald Trump has begun to narrow the gap a little bit. And I think he might be ahead in enough swing states to maybe pull it out. But I'm not certain, but it just seems to be walking a razor's edge. I will say this, though. Look, on one side, folks are going to tell you that if a person wins, Kamala Harris, it's communism and socialism, and we're going to be off the cliff in 2 or 3 years, and that's the end of the country. On the other side, they're going to say that if Donald Trump wins, it's fascism, and Handmaid's Tale in 2 or 3 years, and it's the end of the country. That short of time frame. I personally think our institutions are strong enough. I think as a people, we're strong enough that we can weather a storm. And we can weather, if it's Donald Trump, we can weather another storm. If there's a storm with Kamala Harris, we can weather that storm. So I don't think it's this existential election that we've been told it is for the last 3 or 4 elections. And I get tired of hearing, as an alternative third party guy, I get tired of folks saying, I'd love a third party, I'd love it, but not this time. Sit this one out. Not this time. It's not the right time. It's far too important. Well, sure, we did that. Some folks did that in 2016, just to hear the same thing in 2020, just to hear the same thing in 2024. It's the same repetitive lines over and over again. And I'm here to build something better and create something better. I'm not waiting. And that's where I'm at.
Those are good points. I agree with you. I don't think the country is really going to slide off the flat earth. You know what I mean? I don't think that's going to happen after this election. I'm sure no matter which person gets elected, there's going to be things some are going to like and some aren't going to like. And that's kind of how I think it goes every election. What are your thoughts, Jim?
Well, I agree with Phil that, this Chicken Little approach to demonizing the other person and to try to get our voters to be so fearful that once again, they don't vote for somebody, they vote against somebody because of the negative campaigning. The thing that I think is different is the degree of disinformation, especially through social media and the beginning impact of AI and other things that make the propaganda, we've always had propaganda in politics. We've always had lies. We've always had half truths, but we seem to be immeasurably increasing it. And maybe the sky is not falling, but it might very well be crumbling, if you know what I mean. That every election cycle, we get in a little bit worse situation. We don't go to hell in a handbasket, but maybe we go to purgatory in a shopping cart or something like that. So
I'm trying to picture that. Maybe we could have AI do a picture of that for us.
there you go. So I think this one, as Phil said, I think it really is too close to call. My guess is it's so close that what happens in the next 2 weeks will determine the outcome. That's how close it is. And that's why, as you were saying, John, at the beginning of the program, so many things are happening that we didn't think were possible, one right after the other. It's like we have an October surprise, if you will, every day. And so
That's true.
nothing surprises us anymore. So there's more ahead of us, and there's probably more ahead of us even after the election. First of all, the results themselves may be delayed. Almost certainly they will be contested by the loser or the loser's supporters. And who knows how long that'll all take. So it's not going to destroy the country. It's not going to destroy all of our institutions, certainly. But I think it is chipping away at it. It's chipping away at the credibility and the trust that it takes for a democracy to work. And I don't know that anyone has the single answer to this, but I think this approach that we're trying to evolve and refine in the Alliance Party is a big part of the answer. And that is, let's find the best among us, not the worst, to run for elected office. Let's find people who see it not as a career, but as an opportunity, an act of public service. And they're willing to come in, do the right thing to the best of their ability, and then leave and go live under the laws they helped create, instead of staying in there for 20 or 30 years and becoming multimillionaires in the process. So there's a lot of things that need to be changed and improved. And I think it's pretty clear that neither the Republican nor the Democratic Party are going to do that. They created the status quo. They're happy with it. They like the turmoil and the negative campaigning and the flip-flopping back and forth between one party being in the majority, and then 1 or 2 election cycles later, the other one takes its place, and back and forth it goes. So it's working for them, but it certainly is not working very well for the rest of us.
That is a good point. And yeah, I know it's kind of interesting. And you hear those people that say that you talk about the lifelong politicians, and some people are like, well, why don't they solve some of these issues? And they're like, well, some of the issues they like to keep because that gives them points to run on and for their party to run on and fight against at other times. So that's an interesting thing too. They kind of like the status quo the way it is because it keeps both of them in power. I mean, because it does. Now, we talked a little bit about predictions. Now, I know you guys have some candidates, though, that are actually running. We talked about the presidential. Maybe you'd like to tell people the candidates you do have that are running right now in your different states.
I'll kick off
Well,
in
I'll start
this.
out. We've got 5 in South Carolina. 2 are running for Congress, U.S. House, and 2 are running. Well, the other 3 are actually running for the state legislature. And then, actually, I know we have. Let me back up. We have 2 for the U.S. House, 2 for the state legislature, and then we have 1 running for sheriff. And I emphasize that last one because in our state, at least in South Carolina, that is one of the most powerful elected offices, believe it or not, in our state. And it's also one of the most highly corruptible. It's kind of ironic that we have a lot of sheriffs that end up in jail because they have so much power over law enforcement, over who gets prosecuted and who doesn't, that sort of thing. So we're going all the way from the U.S. Congress down to the local sheriff, county sheriff.
I know in Pennsylvania, sheriffs don't have the same power that they do in some states. So I know some states the sheriff is actually very powerful. So that's interesting.
And then, John, in Minnesota, we have a county commissioner candidate, a candidate running for state House of Representatives out in Southwest Minnesota, and that's a heads-up race. It's a very conservative area, and the Democrats didn't run anybody, so we're heads up against a Republican incumbent. And then we've got a U.S. Senate candidate running against Senator Amy Klobuchar for the, aside from president, the top race that's on the ballot this year in Minnesota.
Yeah, I wanted to get that out there, the candidates you do have running, so that people watching this or listening to this can know that, so that they know things are going on, and they might help motivate them to become more active and contact you guys about the party. So that's why I wanted to get that out there, so they see you are doing things, and that you do have candidates, and that's good to prove. Now, I always try to keep this around a half hour, because I know it's sad, but people lose interest after a half hour. So anything you guys would want to feel you hadn't mentioned that you might want to mention in closing?
Well, John, before we get too far from the candidates, we also have an initiative going this year called the Fulcrum Caucus, which is, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 5 federal candidates, our Minnesota U.S. Senate candidate, the 2 South Carolinian U.S. House candidates, but also a Unity Party candidate out of Colorado and an independent running out of Tennessee. And the 5 of them have joined together and signed a historic pledge that for the first time that if elected, they will all seek to caucus, create an independent caucus, if possible, versus caucusing with either Republicans or Democrats, creating what many folks call a fulcrum strategy, and in a very tight body. If it's 49-49 and a couple of independents in the Senate, then those independents carry a lot of weight, and the House is also equally very tight. So that's an initiative we have going, and it shows, I think, the Alliance Party movement to work with others and work with other candidates and try to create that movement. And so that's, as I said, the Unity Party in Colorado, an independent out of Tennessee, our South Carolina candidates, and our Minnesota candidate.
That is nice, and that will show people that there are options also if that happens, and actually create something that actually does potentially make a difference. And show the other two, if anything, sometimes you wonder if the other parties and the extra parties will also bring up issues that the two big ones need to take notice of, which can help overall in some ways. Not exactly the way you want, but maybe a little bit of a chip in the armor, So, all right, guys. Anything else you might want to say in closing?
The only thing I would add is just to remind everyone that those candidates that we've been talking about in Minnesota and South Carolina have all signed the candidate agreement, which is a public formal document swearing to term limits no more than a total of 12 years in a legislative office. So you're not going to get any more 30, 40-year career politicians if you elect an Alliance Party candidate. Also, the transparency in terms of their IRS returns, and then a lot of other pledges that are meaningful but a little harder to measure, like no negative campaigning, truthfulness, civility, problem solving, etc. So these are hand-picked candidates. We say no to a lot more candidates than we say yes to, because a lot of people don't want to run under those guidelines.
That is good, and I believe in those guidelines. That's a good thing, and especially in this day and age, like you said, of people using AI, and it's an interesting day and age. So I think it makes it easier for people to what's a good way to put it? Maybe stretch the truth. It's easier today than it was in the old days too, I think. So, well, I think the Alliance Party is doing some great things, and you have some people out there doing it. I hope people see this, and I will put the link below, and hopefully people will contact you and get involved, and hopefully we get this thing growing past this election and into the future.
Thank you,
John,
John.
thank you for having us on.
Thank you, gentlemen.